I think I experienced something that I think I've never experienced before in this summer of sermon requests. And the request was for sermons. I think the request for however many, maybe an unlimited number of sermons from the book of Proverbs. And I don't think I'd ever received a request to hear sermons from the book of Proverbs. And if you think about the book of Proverbs, it's what's called wisdom literature in the Bible. It's all about wisdom. Often done in what would be called maybe the parables of the Old Testament. Proverbs, the passage we're about to read, is going to talk about them as riddles and sayings of the wise. And you have a lot of these couplets, you know. And so it sort of befuddled me. You know, what do? Just pick out a few of my favorite themes and throw a sermon at it? And I thought, and I'm still working with this. We may get more into Proverbs, but I've at least dedicated 2 Sundays to Proverbs. But I thought the first Sunday should be the opening of the book, where it sort of gives you the themes. And that's what we're going to read from this morning, the first 7 verses of the first chapter of the book of Proverbs. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
So we are talking about wisdom today, which is right off the bat, I feel, out of place. What is wisdom? Is it, as a lot of dictionaries define it, the place you arrive when you can make a good decision, you make better choices? Is it a sign of your intelligence? Does it come only with experience? Proverbs said a lot in those first 7 verses. And one of the interesting things it says is that wisdom is something that can be attained. It can be learned. There is hope for all of us. Apparently, it requires some study and reflection. Maybe some of us dropped off there. But it's more than just knowledge. It's more than just knowing. It is something that forms your character. I think if nothing else, and perhaps I offend the teachers in here, but I've always thought, and I think there's a movement amongst educators now that recognizes that there's no such thing as a value-free education. We've tried to be neutral about values in our education. I'm sorry, you cannot. Character is a big part of wisdom. And the wise life, one that's disciplined and prudent, to use the Scripture's terms, is about doing what is right and just and fair. Not just knowing it. Not just for the simple or for the young, but wisdom and learning and Proverbs is also for the wise and the discerning, the people that have already arrived. Yet Proverbs claims one more thing. That somehow or the other, a loving and obedient relationship to God, which is what is meant by the phrase, the fear of the Lord, is part and parcel of this thing we call wisdom. This is where knowledge, the beginning of wisdom, begins. So, in Proverbs, wisdom's about knowledge. It's about your character. And it's about your relationship with God. Proverbs teaches knowledge through that Old Testament version of the parables, those sayings and riddles that fill up so much of the book. Proverb instills character by insisting that that knowledge that it imparts must also be put into practice. And Proverbs forms your relationship with God by setting Him as the author, the beginning of wisdom. So, how to preach from the book? Do we just follow it through, all its various nuggets of wisdoms, and listen to its exhortations? Well, I think that's a worthwhile effort. But today I want to look at some biblical qualities of wisdom give us the opportunity to get I think, a bigger grasp on it biblically, and to perhaps reflect on how we're doing. So, here we go. First thing I want you to know about wisdom. Wisdom doesn't wait until you're older and smarter. Do you remember the story of Jesus? He had to be in his Father's house at age 12. His public ministry was concluded in his early 30s. Well, you say, he was Jesus, of course. He was the Son of God. What do you expect? And I say to you, you want to get that picture from Paul that we read just a few weeks ago, I want to say, where it says, you are children of God. You are heirs of God. You are co-heirs with Christ.
Thank you.
Well, studies of wisdom, people have studied this stuff, have shown it doesn't just, it's not related necessarily to age. There's no real correlation with age, and very little correlation to intelligence. Now, you know this to be true. You've heard wise things come out of children's mouths, haven't you? Let me share a few if you haven't. This is from Patrick, age 10. Never trust a dog to watch your food. He probably learned that in one lesson.
Chicken.
When your dad is mad and asks you, do I look stupid? Don't answer him. That was from Michael, age 14. He also contributed this. Never tell your mom her diet's not working. Randy, age 8, opines, stay away from prunes. Tracy, age 14, says, never allow your 3-year-old brother in the same room as your school assignment. Andrew, at age 9, has this bit of wisdom. Puppies still have bad breath even after eating a Tic Tac. Amir notes that you cannot hide a piece of broccoli in a glass of milk. Naomi, 15, she's learned a lot. She says, if you want a kitten, start out by asking for a horse. Lauren, age 9, notes that felt markers are not good to use as lipstick. Joel, age 10, says don't pick on your sister when she's holding a baseball bat. And my two favorites, Eileen, age 8, never try to baptize a cat. And this from a child whose name I cannot pronounce, age 9, but I think it's a great mental picture for me. And never hold a dustbuster and a cat at the same time. Yeah. Okay, what I want to tell you is wisdom's not automatic. It comes from everywhere. It's not automatic with experience, but it comes only with some reflection on the lessons that you've gained from your experience. I don't know if I've told you this story or not. Years ago, when I should have been in college, I was working in a maintenance shop. I was working with a survey crew. We were out most of the time, but sometimes I would come in and I would help the fellow fill out his bookwork that ran the parts for the maintenance shop. His eyesight was getting worse and worse. He had cataracts, and so he'd get to where he couldn't see, and I'd come in and fill out his books. And then when we wouldn't go out, they'd let me just stay in the shop, and I'd sit there, and there was the man who ran the parts. His name was Johnny, and then there was a truck driver who picked up whatever needed to be picked up, large. A lot of times he'd be gone on out-of-town trips, but he was there. He'd sit, and the situation was this. Johnny was behind the desk this way. I was sitting over here, the chair over here. Woody, on the other side of the desk, had his chair facing 90 degrees. And they would have nothing to do but converse. And Johnny would talk about whatever he was talking about for 30, 60 seconds. And then Woody would butt in and he'd be talking about whatever he was talking about. And never ever would the conversations connect. They'd be talking about two completely different things. But they would be talking as if they were doing conversation, one to another. They would never talk about the same thing. And I'd sit over there going, I can't believe they just sit here all day and do this. There was never an exchange. And it takes an exchange to begin any kind of reflection. And it's change that's the threatening thing in it all. The changes that come upon reflection. Do you know somebody that will defend anything to keep change from happening? You know people like that. I know you do. They were both like that. There was a certain way things were to be done, and they weren't going to be changed no matter how many bright ideas came along. Their first instance, their first thought was always to tell you why anything that was different and could create a change was no good. And they'd usually do that by defending what they always did and how that was always the best way that it should be done. Do you understand? Wisdom is not automatic with experience. It's not automatic with age. As that can be measured, it's about a 2% variance in wisdom, if you will. Wisdom doesn't wait until you're older or you're smarter. Wisdom is something that you work on all along. Secondly, wisdom sees the world in shades of gray, not black and white. Suppose you caught your spouse in the act of an adultery. That's pretty much a black and white, isn't it? You know how to respond to that. You know that it's wrong. You know that that is something that is a marriage breaker. Until you remember what Jesus did with that woman that was caught in the act of adultery. What did he say? He said, all you people that know exactly what needs to be done, and you've made your judgment correctly, you go over here and stand for a little judgment yourself. And let the one of you who remains sinless step up and throw that first stone. Now, I don't know what you can take from that, but I know black and white just got a lot grayer.
Yeah, but that wasn't his spouse either.
He's not in that story, is he? Somebody had a spouse, or it wouldn't be adultery. Most people in this world can't deal with that kind of ambiguity, friends. It's a lot easier, it's a lot more comfortable to just have it in black and white. One of the things I learned early on in Presbyterian pastorates, and Marie would send me these people from her work. I'd say, send them, she wouldn't do that to me. But I'd get Baptists who'd been divorced. And Baptists don't believe in divorce, if y'all don't know that. I'd get Baptists who'd been divorced, and they'd come to me to remarry them. And I'd say, well, what about your own church? Oh, we don't believe in divorce. My pastor won't marry us. Now, they can divorce, continue in the church, go somewhere else, become remarried, and go back to their church. I always thought that was kind of weird. Yeah. But it sure keeps things black and white. I don't believe in divorce. Well, I don't believe in it either. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I don't have to deal with it. It's just much easier. Think about how this world operates. It's just much easier if things are black and white. And we don't have to worry about all that gray stuff in the middle. Part of what's going on with police officers in our culture right now is there are people who think things just are always black and white. And policemen and their actions exist on one side of a black and white line. And depending on which side you are, you put them on the black side or the white side. That doesn't matter to me. The point, and I hear this from our policemen, if you only knew, if you could only walk with me one day in what I do, you'll see the ambiguity that I am forced to deal with. Wouldn't it be wonderful if I knew exactly what was going on, black and white in every situation? There's no way. You think about it. It's the way we do everything. the last time you saw a car being sold on its merits? Black and white. You should buy this car because A, B, C, D. It's a better car. It's made better. No. Instead, you see guitar-playing rodents selling you the Kia Soul, right? Isn't it the cutest commercial you ever seen? I can't imagine why I've not run out and bought a Kia Soul. Feel Good sells everything, folks. Right now, the adventure that Marie and I have when we watch commercials, which I just wonder what this is for. I have no idea until the very end and they show the product. Have no idea. Why is it that all those large purchases that you contract for, why do they come with the buyer's remorse clause? Because when you get home, it's not as black and white as it makes me feel good, is it? Oh, it's a $1,200 a month payment for the rest of my natural born life. I need to think about this again. Things get harder when they're not black and white. And yet wisdom will always see the world in shades of gray, not black and white. Wisdom also balances self-interest and the common good. You know, as Christians, we rightly hold up the value of sacrifice. And Jesus, of course, who gave it all, is the consummate example and should be. Yet there are times he had to take care of himself. His early morning solitude is certainly one of those times. Wisdom knows that it cannot give what it does not have. And it finds a balance. I think this works out well for the casual believer, if you will. The nominal Christian. They come to church. They have created something that they can balance out the rest of the week by ignoring God. Go to church on Sunday, put some money in the plate. I've done my sacrifice. I'm free the rest of the week for self-interest. It sounds like a stretch, doesn't it? Oh, it's not. Trust me, I've heard so many versions of that from people in the pews. Yes, even from pillar families. How is it that an elder in my church, an elder who came to me and said, you know, I want my job to just be making sure the pastor is okay. I want him, and would ask me every week, do I need anything? He was a good elder. He served so well. He was wonderful. And then it came to discover that he had a child out of wedlock with another woman. And he was getting a divorce. And he disappeared. When I finally tracked him down, he was quick to tell me he's not going to stand on anybody's judgment. He's made his peace with God. And I just was saddened. And tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, thinking, well, maybe he'd been through the remorse and the forgiveness, and he is in a better place now. But I seriously doubted that that was the case. Sometimes the balance is not between self-interest and the common good. It's a balance between God and what I really want to do with my life. Never works out well that way. Wisdom balances self-interest and the common good. You take care of yourself so that you can better serve the common good. Wisdom also is willing to challenge the status quo. This is where the church gets pretty stupid. You know, why did Jesus earn the wrath of all those religious leaders? Why did he make them so mad? Do you suppose they were just determined to thwart what God was doing in their midst? God has come down here. He's doing these great things. We are not going to stand for that. Of course not. They were doing their best to do what they thought God wanted them to do, which was to keep the rules. They came up in a religion which said to them quite plainly, when you quit keeping the rules, that's when it all goes south on you. Look at your history. Look what you did when God told you to remain pure and be His people, and you intermingled and you did all these other things, and you worshiped foreign gods, and your kings brought you down roads of worshiping foreign idols, and it just went south, and you lost your land. You lost the temple, for goodness sake. So then you read Nehemiah and you read Ezra and you realize it's really about keeping the rules now. If you will just do what God had told you, this bad stuff won't happen to you again. And by Jesus' day, that was so much the mentality of the Jewish people that when Jesus came and said, whoa, the rules point to God. who deals with the weightier matters of justice and mercy. And you're using the rules to get away from that. He infuriated them, scared them to death. Because they were reacting to a rule breaker. Wisdom's willing to challenge the status quo rules. Kenneth Sharp and Barry Schwartz wrote a book called Practical Wisdom. And in it they describe a man in Philadelphia who was convicted of robbery. Rightly so. He held up a taxi with a gun. And the sentencing guidelines for a crime like that was 2 to 5 years. But the judge rightly recognized the facts didn't quite fit. What facts? Well, the guy used a toy gun. It was his first offense. He just lost his job. He took $50, not the entire amount he could get, just $50 to support his family. A very wise judge gave him a shorter sentence, gave him permission to hold a job during the day while he was in jail, and made him repay the $50. What I'm saying is there is a time and a place to put what is right over what is normal or what goes by the rules. Wisdom recognizes that. Wisdom seeks to understand rather than to judge. Jesus has always had the power to judge. But think about it. He's the one who is our intercessor. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 23. Now there have been many of those priests, since death prevented them from continuing in office, but because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he's able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. Your judge is your intercessor. The problem is we tend to be like jurors. We want to judge the actions of others so we can categorize them, good or bad. It's our natural impulse. Wisdom resists that impulse. Wise people operate more like detectives. The goal is to try to explain the other person's behavior. Now, I didn't say make excuses. I said understand it, explain it. This is 99% of what a good counselor does, any Christian or not. And it's hard work. It requires an intense focus. Why do you think the counselor's hour is 50 minutes? You just can't go from this from now on. You've got to have a break from it. It's a very intense thing. That's why it's so much easier to judge and put people in the black and white categories again. Wisdom seeks to understand rather than judge. Finally, wisdom focuses on purpose rather than pleasure. Remember early on in Jesus' ministry, reported in the Gospel of John, he was at a wedding. It's a great celebration. It goes on for a week. A lot of wine flowing, and then the wine ran out. And Jesus' mama comes to him and says, they've run out of wine. Obviously, in that question is the expectation that, I know you can do something about this. Do you remember his response? Woman, why do you involve me? My time has not yet come. Now we know that he in fact acceded to his mama's request. But what he noted first was that there's a purpose involved. And that's first and foremost my concern. When you make studies of people that are considered wise, here's an interesting thing. You find they're not any happier than other people. I think they spend more time in reflection. And they spend more time, because, psychologists measure happiness by the amount of good feelings that you have, which I don't think is a very good definition of happiness anyway. But typically, when it's measured, that's what they measure. But what they do find amongst wise people is that they have a much stronger sense of the purpose in life. And so I think from time to time, wisdom may involve putting away what makes us happy, makes us feel good, if you will, so that we can continue the quest for something that's more meaningful and more significant. What we're going to discover in the book of Proverbs, Solomon makes this very clear. There's a huge, major difference between a person who is a wise person and what Proverbs calls The person who's not wise. That's a fool, by the way. That's the word in Proverbs. And the difference is how they receive instruction and correction. Jesus told a parable. He said, a foolish person builds their foundation, their life's foundation, on sand. And when trouble comes, it's gone. And a wise person builds their foundation on rock, and when trouble comes, it can stand still. And he said, the person who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is the one who's building with the rock foundation. So one of the things I admire most, especially as people get older, is when I see this signs of wisdom in them. I see them as one who listens without being defensive. I see them as one who accepts responsibility without blame. And I see them as one who changes without delay. Praise God that He would give that kind of wisdom to us all. Amen.